Okay, welcome back to my Wazuh EDR home project. We're now moving on to the next machine or asset we're going to investigate, which is this Win10 VM1. Keep in mind, we did see some web exploits. We saw one system that didn't really look like it had any exploits ran against it. We had found a user named John Doe that they were signing into somewhere they really weren't supposed to be, but they are legitimate user accounts. So with all that in mind, we're just going to move on to this next one. So I do have a couple fields already up here. Because I have the username because I know that I'm looking for that John Doe, or just kind of in the back of my mind. I just like to have this command line up because anytime I see a command line, just nice to see what they're doing. So let's just kind of get into this, start looking. So that's normal. This is abnormal. Administrator group changed. John Doe 3 administrator, local group administrators. This should not be happening. First of all, we saw this looked odd because that's a misspelling. And now maybe we figured out why. This is a legitimate user based off our user list. John Doe administrator is legitimate. It looks like somebody somewhere added a new user with a very similar name and spelling and then added that user to the administrator group, which is kind of funny because that would take some type of administrator privileges. So it probably was not Jerry. Okay. I'm going to filter this out because after a lot of research and some other machines, we've kind of figured out this is a false positive. So the user was John Doe administrator. So somehow someone was able to log on to John Doe administrator, but a legitimate account added an imposter account that looked just like it and added it to the administrator group. So let's kind of work our way back because either John Doe is disgruntled or someone's got John Doe's credentials, or maybe someone logged somehow elevated privileges after that. Who knows? Okay, so we're kind of back when all this first started. So we see discovery activity. We see someone running a net command, which of course is always suspicious because why would a regular user do that? Well, they wouldn't. It would be because someone who doesn't know the system is running it. Maybe someone who doesn't belong there. Okay, that's actually what I am interested in. Now look at this. This is very, very interesting. So we see a bunch of these logon failures, and this is very suspicious because we're seeing a bunch of usernames trying to log in locally. They're failing. And the things that are suspicious about this is Jerry's computer normally, so that would be normal. It's not these guys' computers, and we even see a utility account, service account being tried to log in locally. That's very abnormal. And of course, you see, look at it's in alphabetical order, reverse alphabetical order. So I'm going to assume what happened here was when we saw those net commands earlier, this someone enumerated our directory of these usernames, and then maybe that's how they knew to try all these names, and they're going in alphabetical order, which automatically makes me think this is a script or a word list. So we have a problem here. This is not a brute force. This looks like a password spray because we're using a bunch of different usernames and they're not doubling up. So I'm assuming they're just trying one password per username. And if we look at the time, sure enough, they're milliseconds from each other. Let's see if there's somehow we can figure out if they were successful. This is funny. I see two names in a row. And I thought, do we have there's two Michaels? And no, they're the same account. And look, a log on and a log off. So there was a success and they're within milliseconds of each other. See if we can see a password value itself, which probably we can't. Maybe we'll see a hash or something. Again, see the same link, local address. Michael successfully logged on to logon type. It's 3. This is a network logon. And the reason that's funny is because, well, if you're already on the local system, why would you do a network logon? That would explain why we had that local IPv6 right here. Now have Michael's credentials. So we're going to have to go back to those systems again and look for Michael's name, look for any logins. Matthew, Mary, Martha. We're going to go through and see if we see any more of those double ups. It'd be cool if we can do some type of filter for that, but I'm not sure how to do that. So I'm just going to manually go through John Doe administrator. And this, look at this. This is what has me suspicious. So I'm going to say based off this, John Doe administrator's password was compromised successfully. That would explain why we saw before earlier that there was John Doe 3 administrator added. So we have two users whose credentials are compromised. Okay, we see Jerry and Jerry. Jerry's been compromised as well. That would explain why we saw his login as well when we saw some of that suspicious user being added. And again, we're going to use this to then go look in those other systems and see if those usernames are being used somewhere they're not. That would also explain maybe what we saw earlier, which they did not need an exploit because those usernames have already been compromised. Look at that. Jack's been compromised as well. All right. So again, we have found several different users whose credentials have been compromised. PowerShell process spawned Windows command shell. That's certainly something different. Echo logon server. That's a funny command. Raw users text. Yeah, that password spray. That sounds like that's a word list right there, doesn't it? And look at that. It's in Jerry's downloads. So Jerry too. So it looks like as we go backwards in time, looks like Jerry downloaded some type of raw users text list. We know, I know from my experience, when you do some password spray, you have a text list, but you also need the actual script itself. So that looks like that's a part of it. That same net users, look at that. Jerry ran that net user command. So that's funny. The command was ran from Jerry's directory, but it looked like it was executed by a system. So that's funny. This is very weird right here. So look at this. PowerShell process spawned Windows command shell instance. So that's weird. And what it did was it made, look at, we can see the command right there. It made that temporary directory somewhere. So that's weird. No one should be making a temporary user group changed. And this is again where we saw that John Doe 3 administrator being added. The thing that's really weird to me about this is how did they add that? So let's see. And look at, we see an actual password value right there. And that's a funny one, a really cheap, easy password. I'm going to make a note of that as well. Let's see what else we find. This is very, very concerning. Evidence of a new service created. Elevation service.exe. That's funny. It says something right in the title. Maybe that is normal. And it looks like it came from Microsoft Edge. Okay, now this is very concerning because this is related to UAC, user account control. And that is responsible for handling the elevation of privileges in certain processes. So it's a legitimate process, but maybe it was being used illegitimately. So this is very interesting. We see this Windows command prompt started by an abnormal process, Windows System 32. So that's normal. That's normal, but it's who started it, what started it. So let's look at the parent process. So we see the parent command line, parent image. Now this is something very concerning. So we see that same user, Jerry, a lot of suspicious stuff. It's in his downloads, and he downloaded something called trustme.exe. That sounds really suspicious right off the bat. I wish we had a hash of this. So I'd probably get on this system and run some type of hash. But let's recap this really easily. So on Jerry's computer, he downloaded something from Microsoft Edge. We know it's Microsoft Edge because we saw some other logs up above. And he downloaded this thing called trustme.exe, and trustme.exe started a command line process. And now I think we just figured out who's running those commands, which is very, very weird and scary. So we have a lot of things going now. We have a list of accounts that have been compromised. I think ground zero user was Jerry. Okay, oh, look at this. So one thing I was kind of wondering was how Jerry was able to run any of that PowerShell for any type of password spray. And we see right here, somebody changed their execution policy. So it looks like somewhere along the lines, downloaded this malware, got some type of reverse shell, tried to do some things here. It didn't really work. I'm going to guess they did some type of exploit between here. This is what we see, all these things here. I'm sorry, that's where we see the PowerShell. We see this right here. We see these registries being changed. We just see it right here. So we do see that privilege escalation of Jerry's account. This is Jerry's account, the username. And it says right here, domain users group changed. And somehow, some way, they were able to add Jerry to the security enabled global group. Then we see them to actually change the execution policy. And then we see them actually able to start doing more reconnaissance, but from an elevated service. And then that's when we see them be able to actually add this user.